Hi everyone, and welcome to this presentation on integrated parasite management. My name is David Villar. I teach pharmacology and toxicology at the University of Antioquia in Colombia. And this is the last video of a series of 4 in which we talked about the main parasites of concern in ruminants in tropical South America. We have already addressed the problem of resistance to antiparasitic drugs, showing field cases from Colombia. We dedicated a separate video to illustrate how parasites become resistant to chemical drugs, and we use the common cattle tick that we have in the tropics, whose scientific name is Riphicephalus microplus, as you can read here, as an example to explain the different mechanisms of resistance. And this presentation will be dedicated to all those complementary measures that can be used to control parasites, which is basically putting in practice good preventive veterinary medicine principles. I chose the statue on the background of this slide where you can see a veterinarian administering intravenous fluids into a calf, because as veterinarians many times we are perceived as firefighters that are called to extinguish a fire whenever there is a health problem. In reality, when we as veterinarians need to use drugs to solve a problem, it could well be that we have failed to prevent it in the first place. So I hope this presentation will somehow help to convey that message. Here is what will be covered throughout this presentation. We will start by setting the objectives of an integrated parasite management. We'll use the epidemiologic triad to disease control and prevention as a guide or a frame, if you like, to allocate the strategies that can be used in any management program. We cannot address all the methods of control for all the different parasitic problems out there, so we will use the cattle tick, Riphicephalus microplus, as an example, because it's the one that we have worked the most in our part of the world. But in reality, the basic principles could probably be applied to most other parasites. The recent history on the control of the cattle tick will include the successful eradication program in the US, which is now saving billions of dollars a year to the cattle industry in that country, since it was declared free of bovine babesiosis. Which is now obviously considered a foreign animal disease. We will also talk about the conventional methods of control in Colombia, which have, I would say, have made almost every acaricide now useless, because ticks have become resistant to most of them. And another issue that is many times overlooked, at least in our country, is the important role that ticks play to achieve endemic stability for diseases like anaplasmosis and babesiosis. And once this quick history review is done, we will then expand on the different alternative strategies to control ticks, starting by the things that can be done directly at the level of the parasite or the pasture or the host. And finally, we will highlight some of the strategies that of an integrated parasite management for small ruminant nematodes. So starting by the objectives of an integrated parasite management, we need to realize that parasites have all along been present in animals, and even though I may not be able to justify their existence, they may have a role to play that we're not aware of and don't recognize. We know that a few ticks on a cow act as a vaccine for anaplasma and babesia. So at least in our part in the world in the tropics, it may not be a very good idea to have a cow completely clean from ticks. So really the goal should not be to create a parasite-free animal. It's normal for sheep and goats to have a few parasites, just as it is for a cow to have a few ticks. And the goal of an integrated parasite management should be to prevent clinical disease and production losses. Now, as a reminder, any good management program should always start by doing some housekeeping duties, cleaning practices to have good sanitation, use of feeders which prevent wastage and fecal contamination, having clean water free from fecal matter and other debris, avoid overstocking pens and pastures, and finally applying some biosecurity measures like isolating and deworming any new additions that you bring into the farm. Now, you may find many definitions for integrated parasite management. In a nutshell, it refers to all those control measures that we can use against parasites without or before resorting to the use of antiparasitic drugs, which, as you know, has been the conventional way of dealing with parasites. I like to use the epidemiologic triad to convey the message that you can prevent disease by acting on any of the three corners of this triangle. If we disrupt the connection between the environment, the host, and the pathogen, we can basically stop or prevent any disease from happening. So we're going to use this model to identify things that can be done at any one of those points to fight parasites. I included the photograph of John Snow here because he is considered the father of modern epidemiology for his work that proved that without knowing that cholera was produced by the bacteria Vibrio cholera, he proved that the source of the infection was water contaminated from the River Thames in London. And by making that link, he was instrumental preventing future outbreaks of the disease. In other words, he proved that we only needed to act on one of those corners of the triangle, in his case the environment, to solve the problem of cholera in London. This is a slide that Susan Shanian from the University of Maryland kindly shared with me from one of her presentations, and it shows all the different aspects of an integrated approach that can be used to intervene against parasites. Obviously, it would be unrealistic to put them all in practice, so the idea is for each scenario to find what could be used from all this list that will fit your particular farm practice the best, and that will obviously not be more expensive than the conventional practices that you already have in place. Here they have circled some of the aspects that they probably put more emphasis in the North Atlantic coast of the US to deal with the problems of gastrointestinal nematodes in sheep. And now moving on into the history of the control of the cattle tick, Riphicephalus microplus. Here we see an old photograph from the USDA showing aspects of that cattle fever tick eradication campaign. This is a good example of a successful program that in just a matter of a few decades managed to completely eradicate the presence of the tick in all the southeastern states of the US and California. And without this tick, the main disease which is transmitted by the tick, which is babesiosis, also disappeared. And they now estimate savings of up to $3 billion a year from not having this deadly disease. And you may read more on how they make these calculations and all the history on that reference that I provide below. As you can see on the slide here, the operating principles of the fever tick eradication program were strict quarantine, which basically means no movement of animals in and out of infested premises, systematic treatment of cattle with an acroside. At the time they used these concrete constructions. As you can see there, they look like a trench on the ground, and they were called plunge dips because they would basically immerse all the animal in the water bath with the acroside. On the next slide I will show you a video clip of a portable dipping vat on wheels, if you like, which is what they use now on the surveillance program. But these concrete bunkers here are kind of a relic of the past now. And the third key to success of the program was pasture vacation, which basically refers to not introducing cattle in any infested pasture until all the free life stages of the tick have died. If you look at the map below, there is a strip of land which is at the border between Texas and Mexico, and which is called a permanent quarantine zone, in which they keep inspectors doing regular visits of every cattle ranch to make sure that deer and cattle that swim across the Rio Grande are not reintroducing ticks from Mexico. And what happens when they find any cow infested with any tick is shown partly on this short video clip. They will put that ranch in quarantine, and they will run every animal through this trailer, which, as you can see, has a dipping vat, and they do this every 15 days for 6 months. And as you can see, this is quite a time-consuming operation, for not saying expensive one, but it pays off. It's if the country is going to remain free from babesiosis. On the short video clip on the right, you can see one of the inspectors refilling up the tank with Kumafos, which is the organophosphorus acroside which they use, and unlike other ones, it has proved to be very stable if they keep the pH of the water constant. So all they need to do is replenish the tank from one time to the next, and steer it all up well with a power-driven air pump before they run the animals through the dipping vat. On this other slide, we show 3 methods of control for the cattle tick in Colombia, and each one on its own way makes its own contribution to speed up the problem of resistance by removing the population in refugia that maintains the susceptible individuals in the premises. In every case here, they were applying the same chemical, which is fipronil, which is marketed with the trade name of Regent for use against a broad range of agricultural pests. And we have the animal version, which is marketed as Allianz. If you look at the upper left image, by applying fipronil directly on the pasture, what is happening is that the largest population of susceptible ticks in the farm that is present as larvae in the pasture is being removed, basically leaving a few resistant individuals that may always be present to be the ones that will climb on the animals and pass their resistant genes onto the next generation of ticks. This is likely the fastest method to speed up resistance because we're truly removing at once the largest population of susceptible parasites which is in the farm. On the second case, you notice that they are applying Allianz on the back line of this Cebu in that cattle chute. And by doing so, not only are they wasting their money, because this breed is resistant to most external parasites in the tropics, but they're also treating an animal that may allow a few of those susceptible ticks to survive and maintain part of the so-called population in refugia. The fact that they are resistant to ticks does not mean that a few ticks will still be able to infest the animal and manage to successfully complete their cycle. We will see in a minute what is considered as a resistant breed, and it does not necessarily imply that they will repel all the ticks that climb on the animal. So another important principle to a good control of parasites, which is applying target selective treatments to the animals that truly need it, is obviously being ignored here. If you notice on the lower left drawing, selective treatment usually targets the young individuals that are usually the most heavily parasitized and that will benefit the most from the effect of the treatment. And at the same time, it serves to leave some untreated animals in the farm that will maintain certain loads of susceptible parasites, so that the efficacy of the drug is not terminated so quickly. Finally, if we look at the rural farmer on the lower right, what he's doing is he's hand spraying Regent. It's not a bad method, but I would argue that the technique must ensure that you wet the animal thoroughly, starting by the legs, working its way up all around the animal, and particularly in areas where the ticks tend to concentrate, which are not visible and is usually between the legs. As you can see, this was not being done here, and he was also distributing a 20-liter backpack sprayer among more than 10 animals. In reality, each one of those backpack sprayers is intended for only 4 or 5 animals. So the treatment dose was given is obviously below the recommended one, which is another factor that is going to favor the appearance of resistance. Now, having compared the methods used in the US and Colombia to deal with the control of the tick, there is something that is usually misunderstood and overlooked, which is the role played by ticks in endemic diseases in tropical countries like Colombia. And I'm specifically referring to anaplasmosis and babesiosis. These are two diseases with a very high prevalence in our country. And when the infection rate is so high, the approach that we need to take is basically to prevent outbreaks of the disease. In order to achieve this goal, what we want is to attain what's called an epidemiological state of endemic stability, which is basically a state of low clinical disease in spite of high levels of infection. Ideally, we want between 81 and 100% of those animals to be seropositive to the organisms. I'll have to say that for these two diseases, there is paradoxically a situation which is the reverse of what happens with most other infectious diseases, and that is that the calves are resistant until they are 9 months of age. And if they become infected early in this part of their life, they will mount a protective response that will protect them later on. So the goal, at least in our part of the world, is to have them being exposed to certain levels of ticks that will transmit the babesia and anaplasma and will somehow mimic the action of a vaccine against these tick fever pathogens. In Colombia, we tend to see cases of these diseases in animals that were born and raised in the high mountain chains of the Andes, which are free of ticks. And when these animals are taken to a lower altitude where these diseases are endemic, they have no protection whatsoever. They basically die when they get ticks that will transmit either babesia or anaplasma. In this table, we have an overview of the geographic distribution and seroprevalence of anaplasmosis in countries of the Americas. If we look at Colombia, the prevalence ranges between 64 and 100, depending on the area. With such high levels, as I said before, it's better to have all the animals in any farm being positive to the organism, because it will be the negative ones that are at higher risk of developing the disease. As I said before, integrated parasite management refers to all the alternative strategies that can be used instead of or prior to turn into antiparasitic drugs. And we're going to use this epidemiologic triad to list things that can be done on each one of the corners. For example, instead of using chemical drugs against the parasite, we will mention some biological control measures to have host immunity work in our favor. We will see what can be done in terms of vaccines, breed selection, nutrition, and finally we will address some of the multiple things that can be done at the level of the pasture management. We're going to focus the integrated parasite management on the cattle tick Riphicephalus microplus. But before that, let's quickly review the life cycle of the parasite using this diagram from the Australian Department of Agriculture and Fisheries. As you can see, it's a direct life cycle, and at least in Colombia that we know of, there is only one possible host species, which is the bovine. In other countries, there are different species of deer that can also serve as a host for this tick. In a nutshell, the tick takes between 18 to 35 days from the time it climbs on the animal to the day it falls as an engorged tick. It then spends about 14 days laying up to 3,000 eggs, and in about 1 month time from the time those eggs came out of the tick, a larvae will hatch, and it will find its way onto the tip of grass leaves, where it can stay alive for up to 2 months, give and take a few weeks depending on the weather. This cycle is at least what we see in our part of the world, where we have warm weather year-round, and there is really no such thing as a dry season that would somehow slow the activity of the tick. If we look at the things that we could do on the part of the host, the number one would be to select for a resistant breed like the Cebu that you see on that photograph. Distinctive features of this breed is the hump on the upper back of the animal. You can see also a very large flap of skin below the neck, which is known as the dewlap, and they all tend to have droopy ears. A breed is considered resistant when it can repel more than 99% of the ticks that will climb on that animal. A simple way to find out is to release up to 2,000 hungry larvae on top of that animal, and basically wait to see how many of those ticks will eventually manage to feed successfully and drop as engorged females. Now, considering that half of 20,000 larvae would be males, less than 1% would equal to less than 100 larvae of those 20,000 able to survive in that resistant animal. The other alternative is to select for animals within its own breed that harbor less number of ticks. On this, there is a very neat study that was done with a susceptible breed called the Australian Illawarra Shorthorns. Basically, they did a study in which they were removing animals with ticks and keeping those that were least infested. And within a matter of 4 generations, the resistance in that one farm went from 89.2% all the way up to 99%. So basically, they achieved the same resistance as if they had crossed one of those susceptible animals with a pure Cebu stud bull. As you can read, and you can read more about these studies on the reference below if you like. Now, with regards to nutrition, there are no specific studies that relate the impact this may have on the ability of the animal to repel the tick. If we simply rely on field observations, we find that there is a large variation in number of ticks within animals of the same herd, and many times those that are in poorest body condition or have other health conditions will be the ones that the ticks attack more aggressively. Another means to increase the immunity of the host would obviously be the use of vaccines specifically designed to somehow kill the tick when it's feeding on the animal. There are so far 2 vaccines commercially available in other countries, unfortunately not in Colombia. Both are very effective and are based on the tick meat gut protein called BM86. These are very good vaccines. The downside is that the antigen is inside of the tick or concealed to the immune system, if you like. So they need repeated inoculations to provide good levels of continued immunity. And usually it requires booster vaccinations every 6 months, which can make it a rather costly issue for many farmers. Now, what's interesting about these vaccines is that their efficacy accounts for having an effect not only on the number of ticks on the animal, but also on the reproductive capacity of the tick in terms of number of eggs that can be laid, or how many of those eggs will eventually hatch. For the first one, tick guard, the combined efficacy of all those 3 parameters can reach up to 90% efficacy, which is enormous. Unfortunately, the Colombian market is flooded with fraudulent medicines. Here we see the vaccine, which is currently available in Colombia, that has been approved for more than a decade. And not only us, but also some independent researchers outside of the country have shown it to be worthless. The only study available is not even presented in a scientific journal. This Acobes magazine is basically a local trade magazine for veterinarians, and they report results of 44% reduction in tick counts, 49 lower egg production, and 69 reduced eclosion rates. In my opinion, everything said here has been totally fabricated, and something smells fishy, but it's really not worth spending more time talking about it. Now, moving on to another corner of the triangle, let's see what could be done to attack the parasite on the animal, apart from the conventional antiparasitic drugs. I took this picture in one of the local farms. After these cows were manually milked every day, some of them would lay down, and these chickens would simply jump on the animals to groom them from ticks. You can notice by the color of those feathers that this one rooster was definitely well fed, And it seems like that cow was acknowledging his work and was happy to have the chicken there. There are also some wild birds that stay close to cattle and will do pretty much the same thing. Here are some of the ones that we have in Colombia. We have the yellow-headed caracara, the cattle egret, and the smooth-bill Annie. However, I would argue that it's probably unlikely that using only birds we can really tip the balance to achieve proper control on the population of ticks. We don't really know if ticks have any other real predators. I put a question mark on those ants that are apparently carrying some eggs, because if there is really a carnivore ant that would prey on the eggs of ticks or the tiny larvae, it would no doubt be a formidable weapon that we could potentially use, at least in places where the antiparasitics are no longer working. Now, another biologically derived control agents are the fungal biopesticides. There is a large body of literature on this topic, and I would say that they hold a lot of promise, but at the moment, even if they have shown excellent results in laboratory settings, when taken to field trials, they have not really measured up to the expectations from those in vitro assays. There are a number of funguses like this Metarrhizium anisopliae, whose spores will attach to the cuticle of the tick, and when they germinate, they penetrate or invade the structures of the tick and will basically destroy all the organs inside. Now, the one thing about these funguses is that they are not specific to ticks. We don't really know their impact on other organisms that are not the target and which may be beneficial. As you can see here, this Metarrhizium anisopliae has been found to be pathogenic to at least 200 insect species. Even if there is quite a few of these biopesticides commercially available, they are all for agricultural pests, and none of them is labeled for use against ticks in livestock. And as I say, it's likely that we might find some of these formulations available in the near future, but at the moment that I know of, there isn't anyone specifically to target ticks in cattle. Having said that, we do have some of these fungal products on the Colombian market that are indeed marketed for use in livestock against ticks. And one of them is sold under the trade name of Bioplaque that you can see here, and the label claim it does everything except what it truly does in reality. We have used it in field control trials following all the instructions of the label, and there was no effect whatsoever on the number of ticks on the animal or the reproductive performance of those ticks. The slide here also shows another one. This one is on the black market because it's not legally registered. Again, another one which is totally useless. Unfortunately, the Colombian market is filled with so-called natural biopesticides. Here is an example of an injectable formulation that claims to be a natural pyrethrin against both endo and ecto parasites. We did some HPLC analysis and found a concentration of 10.5% ivermectin. The label recommends using a volume per body weight that would deliver a dosage of 2,100 micrograms per kilogram of body weight of ivermectin in the animal. And this is approximately 4 times the maximum dose recommended on for any approved ivermectin on the market. To make things worse, the label also claims that the product does not create residues on milk or the carcass of the animal, and so there is no need for a withdrawal period for the milk or to slaughter the animal. And this is obviously a clear violation of the law because the consumers, at least in Colombia, are being exposed to this drug and who knows which other ones. There is one other method which tends to be used by resource-poor farmers, not only in Colombia, and you can read the 2 references listed here that came from South Africa, which is the application of used motor oil, like the one you see coming out of that vehicle. I am not advocating to use it on cattle, but it's obviously a very inexpensive method of tick control, We noticed that in order to be effective, it really requires direct contact between the oil and the tick, because it needs to clog the spiracles through which the parasite breathes. So you may need to paint the entire animal in black if he's heavily infested. Also, the downside is that we're exposing the animal to who knows how many combustion products might be present on that oil. We know of polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, some metals, metallic oxides, to name a few. Many of these chemicals are definitely strong carcinogens and dangerous environmental contaminants. And what is normally seen when you apply this onto the skin is hair loss, dryness of that skin, which are obviously undesirable effects. And if they use it very frequently, it will definitely cause a chronic inflammation of that skin. The Simmental bull that you see on this photograph was from a local farm. He had very dry, hairless, and flaky skin, wherever that oil had been applied before. Finally, we're moving into things that can be done on the pasture to control the free living stages of ticks. And in reality, the principles could also be applied to many other parasites. In the case of the cattle tick, a clean or safe pasture is one that is free from the non-parasitic stages of the tick. Here is a list of things that could be done to clean the pasture. The first one is to put your animals in a pasture that has never been grazed by cattle. This one ties up with the second one, which is to put your cattle in a pasture that has been grazed by other type of livestock, sheep, goats, horses. Basically, neither one of those can serve as a host for the cattle tick. The third one is a pasture that has not been grazed by cattle for more than 3 or 4 months. I must point out that this is the time frame that we're applying in our tropical weather conditions. I know that in the US they used to vacate or rest pastures for more than 6 months. Now, if a pasture is heavily infested, we could easily clean it by doing any of the next practices that we see here, which basically is dedicating the land to anything different from grazing with animals. We could harvest that grass for making bales of hay or a silage crop. We could renovate the pasture using tillage practices. I guess it seems logical that mechanical agitation of the soil and that overturning will bury and kill most of the free stages of most parasites. We could rotate the use of a pasture with planting row crops. And finally, there are options like burning and using annuals instead of perennial plants. I borrowed these 2 photographs from Susan Shanian with examples of 2 of these practices for the control of roundworms in small ruminants. But they could equally be relevant for the cattle tick. The first one is to alternate grazing between cattle and sheep. Since they don't share the same type of parasites, with exception maybe like the liver fluke, one will serve to decontaminate the pasture from the other one's parasites. This would obviously be a good strategy if the farm raises both types of livestock. The other example is a recent row plantation of pearl millet, which is a cereal crop that stands drought conditions better than other ones like wheat or corn. Obviously, when you establish a pasture from scratch, planting the seed, it can be considered free from parasites. Another option that was not included in the previous list was using alternative forages. This has been proved to reduce the parasite load of roundworms in sheep and goats. Unfortunately, we don't have the similar good experiences to control the cattle tick. Just as I was mentioning with the fungal biopesticides, there are very good studies showing good results in laboratory settings or experimental plots. But when these were taken to field conditions, they didn't really perform as suspected. One of these studies was published in Nature back in 1982. They evaluated the anti-tick properties of different species of the tropical alfalfa, Stylosanthes, and they did so by infesting experimental plots with larvae and then they drag a flannel cloth to see how many of those ticks could be recovered. Basically, the stems and leaves of these plants are covered with what are called glandular trichomes that produce sticky secretions, which are either lethal or they just simply trap the larvae and prevent them from ascending further up on the plant. These are obviously mechanisms of defense that the plants have against feeding insects, and we could say that the effect on ticks is incidental. My opinion is that in order for these plants to have a potential use in field conditions, they would probably need to dominate other grass species on any sward, and don't leave really ticks with any other options but to try to climb on these ones. Otherwise, their impact will probably be limited. Now, having said this, Stylosanthis makes excellent tropical pastures. This is a legume which is native to South America. It has a high nutritional value. So if a large percentage of the ground coverage was occupied on any field, I guess this tropical alfalfa could definitely be part of a good integrated parasite management for ticks. As you can see, there is also some grass species like this gamba grass with some papers published like the ones you see listed here. Again, a significant effect in experimental plots, but not so promising on field conditions. Another grass species, which is native to Africa, but is well established in South America and Colombia, is this molasses grass. When this grass was grown in as monoculture plots, it was found to be highly lethal and repellent to the larvae of those cattle ticks. As you can notice on the slide here, this plant has long trichomes or hairs on both the stems and the leaves, and they will basically immobilize the movement of larvae. In addition, this plant secretes resin, which is not only responsible for the typical molasses smell of the plant, but it also has a strong repellent effect, driving away larvae. And again, this grass would most likely be very effective if it comprises a large proportion of any pasture sward. The topic of integrated parasite management in small ruminants is definitely very relevant in Colombia, because as I showed on the previous video, all the dewormers available against the main parasitic problem, which is the barber pole worm, are no longer functioning, and the only alternative is to start implementing some alternative strategies. This is an area that we still don't have much hand experience, so whatever I say will be short of many excellent presentations like the ones you see here by Susan Shanian of the University of Maryland. So instead of trying to elaborate on this topic, I encourage you to go and check out the link provided here on sheep and goats. This link will take you to a page with a series of small ruminant webinars, which are sponsored by the University of Maryland. And you can find this excellent one on integrated parasite management on that link. So thanks again for watching this presentation. I hope you enjoyed it and found information that can be useful to your interest. And feel free to contact me to the address below if I can be of any assistance. So having said this, goodbye and take care. Bye bye.